Hello, I'm Dr. Pam Jarvis, Chartered Psychologist, Historian, University Lecturer and Teacher. This is Ed, my youngest grandson. He's just 12 weeks old and he's going to be my assistant for this session. Ed might not be able to say hello at the moment, but don't be fooled by that. He's actually got a lot more potential brain power than I have, because the neurons in his brain are not wired up yet. They're still incredibly malleable. If, for example, we spoke 3 different languages to Ed at this point, then by the time he's about 3 or 4, he'll be able to speak those languages effortlessly without a foreign accent. If, on the other hand, I tried to learn 2 different languages now, I would have to work very, very hard at it, and I would never speak them effortlessly. That's because the wires in my brain are now connected and in some ways fixed, not completely, but much more fixed than Ed's are. Babies are much smarter than adults, but what we have to do is facilitate the development of that potential. One thing I am better at Ed is if you give me something to remember, it's much easier for me to do so, because I have other ideas in my memory, clusters of ideas in my memory that the information can stick to. These were called schemas, but effectively what happens is they act like hangers in a wardrobe. An idea comes in and it hangs on similar ideas. If, for example, you showed me a furry, 4-legged animal I had never seen before, I would immediately hang it on the hanger called mammals, because my brain's already wired up in that sense. Ed's brain isn't wired up like that at the moment, so he needs some time to create the hangers that work in his mental wardrobe. The human schema building process starts from very simple beginnings, and basically the apprenticeship stage runs from birth to about 7 years of age. If we try to fill children's minds with stuff before they've actually created those basic hangers to hang the thoughts upon, what happens is they start getting extremely confused. I always give my students the analogy of a wardrobe where you've just thrown clothes to the bottom because there aren't enough hangers. If they don't have the hangers to hang the clothes on, then the clothes just fall to the bottom and they just get very jumbled. What we need to do is to help children to create those hangers for the thoughts to hang upon. The way in which human beings naturally learn between the ages of birth and 7, the period when they're creating the hangers, is through spontaneous, flexible interaction with adults and peers, where adults facilitate play-based learning. The children direct where they're going and what they're doing, and the adults then lead them on with this. It's a process called sustained shared thinking. This is the way that human beings learn to become independent learners, that is, people who can direct their own learning and understand when they're learning, when things are getting too difficult, and when they need to ask for help. What they're doing, if you like, is creating those hangers for the thoughts to hang upon in the mental wardrobe that they're creating. The education system in England does not actually facilitate this at the moment. What we are doing is trying to input stuff far too early before those hangers have been created. The most pressing issue in many English-speaking nations is the fact that those who create policy for education don't understand how human learning actually starts. Basically, how child development proceeds and what it is that actually creates the foundation for the types of learning that children do in school after they are around about 7 or 8 years old. The way that human learning proceeds, as far as policymakers seem to think in England and in some other English-speaking nations at the moment, that teachers are supposed to behave like memory sticks full of material, and they kind of somehow plug into children who act like PCs who are going to absorb that material. But between birth and 7, it just doesn't work like that. So lots and lots of problems are arising from an education system based on that faulty premise. As more and more is expected of children in terms of absorbing stuff in this period between particularly 4 and 7, the more problems this creates. We have known for nearly a century that human learning, particularly in the early stages, is stage-based, and that you have to take different tactics to work with children under 7 to those that you take to working with children over 7. Two very famous theorists, Maria Montessori and Jean Piaget, both of these created stage-based theories. Montessori called this planes of development, and Piaget talked about stages. It really matters not how you model it. What you have with children from birth to 7 is people who are learning to learn, and we have to respond to that in the ways that they learn the best, which is in a much freer play-based environment than the one we give them at the moment, where they choose what they do and adults engage with them in the topics and in the areas that they are actually asking for support. We actually did know this long before even Jean Piaget and Maria Montessori started their more scientific research into human learning, because we had practitioners such as Robert Owen from the New Lanark project, greatly opposed to the drilling of children in phonics and word decoding. He said that they had to learn reading in the sense that they were reading for meaning, that they were reading for information, and that they were really engaging with the material that they were reading. Now in the 21st century, we have a phonics test for children when they're average age 5.5, where they're asked to decode nonsense words. Robert Owen in the early 19th century would have seen great problems with this. Some nations have a much better understanding of the way that young children learn. Finland, for example, does not start children at formal school until they're 7, and it has no statutory assessments all the way through primary education. Finland is the Western nation that sits most reliably at the top of the International League for children's accomplishment when they get to the age of around about 14 or 15. This is tested in a set of international comparisons called the PISA tests. Finland starts children at school when they're 7, and it does no statutory assessment all the way through primary schooling. Of course, we need teachers to know when children are presenting with developmental problems, but this comes from actually training teachers very, very carefully and trusting their professional judgment to decide when a learner needs special help, not by testing tiny children through a set of statutory tests which cannot actually obtain the information that it needs in terms of their accomplishments outside the environment of the very artificial test. Ed will only be 84 when the century turns again to the 22nd century. In this sense, the 21st century belongs to him, not to my generation and not to the people who are currently sitting in government at the moment. What they need from us is an education system that actually has at the base of it the understanding of how human beings learn, particularly very young human beings between birth and 7. Like all parents and grandparents across the nation and across the world, my 3 grandsons are the most precious people in the world to me. I might be an academic, I might be a psychologist and a historian, but actually, first and foremost, I'm a grandmother. I call on people who make policy for education to talk to people who are experts in child development, to talk to people who are experts in teaching practice about how to best make policy to educate Ed and his brother and his cousin so they become the best that they can be, and to meet that potential that is present within their extremely flexible brains to be the best that they can be for England and for the world throughout the 21st century.